Um, Greetings to you all, good friends, and I welcome you to today's conversation in labor economics. We want to have this conversation in labor economics. Right. Okay. So, what is it that we study under labor economics? So, in this conversation, we want to give you a mastery introduction to labor economics. You understand what labor economics is all about. And basically, we want to ensure that we prepare you very well, give you a proper roadmap so that at the end of it all, you understand what is involved in labor economics. And ultimately, you should be able to apply the key concepts that are there in labor economics. Okay, to start with, what is it that we are going to study? Okay, and to start with, we can say that labor economics is made up of the two words. As you are able to see, there is labor, there is also economics. So to start with, labor is actually referring to the human efforts that encompasses the skills, the services, the services provided using the skills, using the competency, using the knowledge capacity of the people. So all the human effort that they do contribute towards production processes is what is known as labor. And then the economics, on the other hand, is a branch of science. Actually, is a science, a social science devoted to the study of how the scarce resources are allocated, right? The scarce resources that nature and the past generations have provided. So the study of the allocation of those scarce resources that nature and the past generations have provided is what is known as economics, on the other hand. So we want to see how we can apply the economic concepts in the labor market. So that's what we are doing mainly. Okay. So now, good friends or colleagues, I just want you to understand the following key things that we are expected of studying in labor economics. To start with, labor economics is the study now of the workings and the outcomes of the labor market, right? Let me highlight this. Let me write down properly that you are able to know this and get this properly. Okay. What is it that we study in labor economics? So in labor economics, um, we study the workings and outcome of the market for labor, right? Study the workings and the outcomes of the market for labor. So it is actually mainly concerned with the behavior of employers and the employees in response to wages, in response to the prices, in response to the profits and working conditions, right? So it is concerned with the behavior of the employers and employees as they respond to wages, right? As they respond to the price, says, and profits and working conditions. So labor economics is actually capturing the following in the study. Number one, it captures the relationship that exists between the wages and employment opportunities. It is there to capture the relationship between wages and the employment opportunities. In labor economics, we also study the interaction among wages, income, and decision to work. The way wages, prices, profits affect occupational choices is also one of our interests as we study labor economics. We want to see how wages, the prices, and the profits affect the occupational choices. We study the incentives for and effects of educational and training investments. That's what we do as well. And we don't just end there, we continue. We study the effect of unions, of wages, productivity and turnover as well. So we will have these conversations in detail. And actually, we continue and study the effect of the social policies. That is to say, the minimum wages, labor legislation, and labor legislation, and safety and health regulations, and wage and employment. So that is what we actually study. So we will have a conversation that always hinge around the labor market. The labor market is a well-arranged mechanism that brings together the employer and the employees into a common environment to interact with each other. Formally, we would say that the labor market is a place where employer and employees interact with each other. However, with the change in technology and development advancement, we can no longer say it's a place. Specifically, it's just a structure, a well-arranged mechanism that brings together the employers and the employees for transaction. So that's a conversation that we get to hold. Okay. So now, as we study labor economics, we continue with our own expectations. Okay. What is it that we are going to cover, and how is the outline looking like? In the first unit of our conversation, we will have time to just remind you a bit about what economics is all about. We'll talk a bit about the types of economics. We'll define what labor is. We'll give you the key definitions one more time to labor economics and the factors that determine the size and composition of labor force, right? We'll look at the factors that determine the size and the composition of labor force. We will not end there. We will look at the importance of labor economics and the scope of the same. Then we will conclude by looking at the nature of labor problems in developing economies. That is what is going to be covered in the first unit. Have that conversation. In the second unit, we'll have time to look at labor demand, the concept behind labor demand. The major things that we'll do here, we'll try to define what labor demand is. And we'll have time to look at the concept of the elasticity of labor demand. We'll look at the determinants of the same elasticity of labor demand, or basically the responsiveness of the quantities of labor demanded with response to the changes in wages. How does, the quantities demanded, of labor change because of the changes in the wages? We will study that relationship mathematically in what is known as elasticity of demand for labor. You and I may be aware that labor, the demand for labor changes, and it is actually influenced by some factors. So because of the same, we'll have time to, look at the factors affecting demand for labor. You may be aware, and it would actually interest you to learn that the demand, the labor demand curve is downward slope. The labor demand curve is just like a normal demand curve. It has got, a negative, it has got a negative slope. That's to say it's downward sloping. But why would we say the labor demand curve is downward sloping? Why should it be sloping downwards? So we'll find out the reasons as we move on. The other key thing that we will look at in the second unit, we'll ask ourselves, like, how do you get to decide how many people to employ at each specific time? What should be the guiding criteria for you to choose whether to employ people at that time or not to employ? Because of the same, we'll look at the marginal revenue product, especially in the perfectly competitive markets. And we'll still do the same in the monopoly and the imperfect competitions. We will ask ourselves what happens when wages rise. What are some of the effects? That is to say, the income and substitution effects. We'll hold these conversations in detail. Okay. Now, we have talked about demand for labor, and you usually get it that the demand of labor is actually from the firms, the suppliers, the firms, the companies, the government. They are the ones that demand this labor. Okay. Both the government, the quasi government institutions, among others. Now, what about labor supply? When we look at labor supply as well, it will be actually one of the units that will cover, and that will be the third unit. In here, we will look at, the supply of labor itself. What does it mean? And we'll look at the factors influencing the supply of labor. One thing that would interest you to learn is that the supply curve of labor, it slopes backward, right? Let me show you. You learn that this is the supply, they need to curve like this. But why should it, curve backward? We'll have a conversation and explain the reasons as to why the supply curve, labor should just curve backward like that. We'll have time to have the conversation on the income and substitution effects and the factors that influence labor supply, labor market intervention, and basically the influence of education and training, of course, to the supply of labor. Right. We will not hold the conversation from there, but instead we will continue and look at how the education benefits the nation. You would understand that some economies exert much energy and invest heavily in education of the human capital, that is to say, the education of their citizens. But why should that be the case? So we would want to look at the motivation behind the same. Why should the policymakers, value, education and depict it as one of, the key factors that give benefits to the country? How job training influences the economy for employers, for workers, and for actually the general economies as well. So these are some of the conversations that we will hold. Then we'll try to see how economics is heavily applied in what is known the cobweb model. And this will be a very interesting conversation that will cover here. Once we have discussed all that, we will have time to open another conversation, and that will be the fourth unit, where we will now look at the friction in the labor market. We have talked about demand of labor, we've talked about the supply of labor, but now let's look at the friction in the market. So here, we will have an idea of defining what is known as a monosonistic labor market, where this is a market where there is only one buyer of labor, right? For example, the government, it could be the only employer, of some certain labor. Okay. What happens in such markets? So define what a monopson is, monopson in labor markets, and the examples of the same monopson in labor markets. the minimum wages in the Monopson and the Monopson in the real world. The Monopson and the rigid the rig economy and the problems of the same Monopson in labor markets. We will have time to look at the price flows in the labor market and the idea behind the minimum wage and what happens, right? So that is to say, there is that time when you set the minimum wage, you say that the maximum that one can actually get is this particular amount. But when the government sets that minimum wage, what could be the impact of the same? So we'll have a conversation on the wage determination. How do you determine the wages, okay, to give to the people? And how these same wages, are determined in the perfectly competitive labor markets. Okay, so this is what we are going to conversate on. And actually our conversation will be based on the same when we are looking at that friction. We cannot end labor economics by just keeping quiet after studying all that. We'll have another unit, being the 5th unit, where we'll look at the idea behind the pay, okay, remuneration, and productivity. In the 5th unit, we look at the remuneration and productivity. So here we look at motivation. How do you motivate the labor force? How do you motivate the workers, the workforce, sorry? And we'll have an idea to peep into the theories of extrinsic and intrinsic motivation. That is to say, some people, the motivation is influenced by some external factors. That is called extrinsic motivation. And some other motivation is moved by, internal factors, and that is called intrinsic motivation. We'll have a deeper conversation around that. We will not end there. We'll look at the hierarchy of the needs theory that was proposed by one of the theories, and the needs theory and the workplace. The 2-factor theory and the workplace will be looked here. We'll discuss the expectance theory, the theory at the place of work, look at the equity theory. In short, we'll look at so many theories. We'll look at the wage determination within the firm and the general objectives that are there. That's problem number 1, 2, 3, where we look at the contracts and the information asymmetries. By information asymmetry, we mean the information is not well balanced from one side and on the other one. So that is to say, others have got more information than the other. So let me give you an example of the suppliers and the producers, or maybe let me say the suppliers of labor, demanders of the same labor. So you find that, say, the demanders may have some more information about a certain aspect, and the same guys who are to supply, the counterparts, may not really know much. So there is that idea that happens. Or on the other hand, let's try to flip the coin. Let's flip the coin and see what happens. Sometimes the suppliers of labor themselves know much about themselves. They even know their limitations, but when they are trying to, communicate to the employers, proposing to the employer so that they can be employed, you find that sometimes they do lie, okay? Some information that they give is not truthful. And because of the same, there is idea to study for the demanders of labor, for the firms, to study and bring into play a certain mechanism to capture and ensure that they eradicate these, dishonest. So we'll have time to look at discourage cheating by signaling. By signaling simply means that people should send some qualifications, some papers. No, that's not just an idea to signal, to communicate to those suppliers that you are qualified. And usually they have even gone ahead and say, can you send the certified qualifications? That is to say, you are sending those qualifications that are certified, not just the fake ones. Discourage the cheating by self-enforcement as well is one of the things. Then you have time to look at the different types of pay. For example, that kind of remuneration where it is time-based, what could be the impact, and the major characteristics of compensation plans. Sometimes, depending on the level at which you pay people, you see that productivity changes. So we'll have time to look at the relationship between what you pay people and actually how productive they get to be. Look at the effect of the promotions and the standard promotions that are made so that we can influence our labor force further. Okay. Labor economics is very important and very interesting, I think, from the few things that I've just highlighted to you. But in the unit number 6, okay, which is the second last, we will have time to look at the union and labor market. So here, we just want to, understand what labor union is, what it does, how it works, okay, what really constrains the same unions, what problems are they facing. We'll have time to study the idea behind collective bargaining and looking at the features of the same collective bargaining and the effects actually of labor unions, what they actually influence, what they do. And we will end the unit by looking at unemployment. This is the last unit that we'll have in the labor economics. Yeah, we'll define what unemployment is. We'll explain the concept behind, unemployment. Even the classical doctrine of unemployment shall be expounded right in here. We will have time to explore the Keynesian doctrine of unemployment and the different types of unemployment, being structural unemployment, frictional unemployment, demand deficiency unemployment, which is also called the cyclical. It is called the cyclical unemployment, seasonal unemployment, and even have time to look at the causes of unemployment. And we'll start with the prime causes and other causes of the same unemployment. So in short, we will study unemployment. So to summarize everything, in labor economics, what is it that we study? Number one, we will have time to look at mainly the demand, the labor demand and supply of the same labor. Then from there, we'll have time to look at the friction of this labor market, like, what challenges are there in the market. That is the 4th unit, and we'll have time to look at the idea behind what you pay people, the impact of what you pay and productivity. That's pay and productivity. We'll have time to look at the unions and labor markets and what really those do. And finally, we'll look at unemployment. So that's a general scope of labor economics. So just be reliably informed that this is basically applied economics in the labor market. And then you will have to understand that we do a lot of quantifications here, a lot of graphings, a lot of concepts will be explored right in here.